Moana Pasifika will be no more after the 2026 season, folks. That is the announcement this morning. There were rumors about it yesterday. They don't have the money to keep things going in 2027, so Super Rugby will be down to 10 teams from the 2027 season. It's pretty bad news for everyone associated with the club, so our thoughts go out to everybody, not just the players, the coaches, admin staff, social media people. There's a bunch of people who have just found out they're essentially soon to be out of a job, so that is, especially given the economic conditions at the minute, really tough news, and our thoughts go out to all the people associated with Moana. I want to talk for a few minutes about what I think went wrong with Moana and why it never really got off the ground or potentially achieved its mission. And you guys can let us know your thoughts on what you think about the Moana situation. Obviously, they were established in 2022 as part of this new Super Rugby Pacific competition with a mind on being a platform for players, especially those of Tongan and Samoan, but I guess also technically Fiji, but Fiji's got the Drua, as a pathway for players to get professional rugby playing experience at Super Rugby level, then potentially go on and represent Tonga and Samoa. And as a pathway from players from Tonga and Samoa to find professional rugby playing contracts. Moana was going to limit the number of players who weren't eligible for the 3 Pacific countries for their playing roster. They would only be able to have a certain number of only Kiwi eligible players, that kind of thing. I don't know that goal was ever really achieved, and I don't know that they ever really found a home or a fan base. I do think, and maybe you call me out if I'm being a little bit cynical here, but if you've been to Auckland, especially during rugby league season, you know that rugby league has a big impact on Auckland and in particular the Pacific community. Auckland's got a massive Pacific community, and when the Tongan rugby league team in particular is playing, the streets, some of them, are decked in red. Red Tongan flags everywhere. Samoan flags as well. You'll see cars driving down the street with big flags billowing out the back windows and people honking at each other, and it is genuinely, it's lively and it's a thing. It's a cultural event in this city when the Tongan Rugby League team is playing, when the Samoan team is playing, and the Warriors generally are a bigger, individually, they're a bigger franchise than any of the 5 New Zealand Super Rugby teams. The Warriors are massive. They're the only rugby league team, professional rugby league team in New Zealand, so they get massive support. I feel like, this is the cynical part, Moana was partly set up and dumped in at Mount Smart, the home of the Warriors in the NRL, that stadium, to try and tap in on some of that Pacific community here in Auckland. They figured, hey, Tongan Rugby League fans turn out in droves. They are very fanatical fans. Warriors fans are big. Let's try and get some of these people into Super Rugby following Moana Pasifika. But it didn't really ever pan out. The initial crowds at Moana Pacific games in Mount Smart, where all these fans turn out for the Tongan Rugby League team or, the Warriors, it didn't really happen with Super Rugby for Moana. I feel like it's pretty kind of obvious why. The Tongan Rugby League team is stacked full of superstar players, and it is the national team. Moana Pasifika, especially initially on, was a team full of journeyman players, up-and-coming players. There was no real big-name star talent, and they're a team who finished last. Of Moana's history, 2022 they finished last, 2 wins out of 14 games. Second season they finished last, 1 win out of 14 games. Third year they did win 4 games to finish second last. Then their fourth year, 2025, when Artie signed on, was the exception year for Moana, where they got bigger crowds and they got a better result record. They finished with 6-8, close for the playoffs, but not quite. And then now they're back to that kind of 1-7 record this season. They are in last place. So there's a big difference between the Tongan Rugby League team, which is, as I said, a national team full of stars, compared to Moana Pasifika. So I don't think it's a huge surprise that they didn't get the kind of same buy-in. Plus, the other factor is, in Auckland, we already have a Super Rugby team. So if you're into Union and you're from Auckland, you're probably a Blues fan. There's a potential, I suppose, for some people to either support 2 teams or to switch teams, but the Blues have been around for a long time. So it's a hard ask to ask people to convert from rugby league, which is massive here in Auckland, or the Blues, who are a well-established franchise with a long history, to suddenly support a team with no real star players who are finishing pretty much last every year. I feel like that's a hard ask. And then the home they had, Mount Smart, didn't really end up being their permanent home. They've moved around a bit. There was plans to play more games in Samoa and Tonga. That never really eventuated due to the costs. So they just kind of became New Zealand's sixth franchise, playing some games at North Harbour, at Pukekohe, at Rotorua. Where are the fans? It's hard when your team is a nomadic team moving around different parts of New Zealand. Who are the real fans? It's honestly, it's an uphill battle when you haven't got a home and you're competing against the NRL, which is bigger than Super Rugby. Rugby League's one that the club game's bigger than the international. And Union International's bigger than the club game. We've talked about this before. But yeah, you can't compete with the NRL with a losing team. You can't compete with the Blues with a losing team. You can't compete when you don't have a home ground. It was tough. They probably could have had better success if they'd stayed at North Harbour more, but apparently there was an agreement when Moana got started that they would be limited to the number of games they could play in the Auckland region due to conflict with the Blues. I don't think that would have been the answer if they'd been able to play every game at North Harbour, but it would have been better. But yeah, having to go down to Rotorua and whatnot, not ideal for Moana. So no home, no real fan base, and star players. They've had some guys who emerged through Moana and became outstanding players. That is for sure. That is the great thing about having more teams, is guys get an opportunity to expose their rugby talents. They get to develop their rugby talents. They become full-time rugby players. That's a way to get better at rugby, funnily enough. If you're playing part of the season as a rugby player and then having to go do your day job through the rest of the year to keep food on the table, that's going to be different from if you're a professional rugby player who gets paid to play rugby. So we saw the emergence of quite a few standout players. Even from the early days, like Henry Stowers was the big standout player of Moana in their first year. But how many years did he last with Moana? He lasted one before he went over to Benetton. Solomon Nakata was kind of already a star player, played one season for Moana before heading for the UK. You had Leva Almua and Timothy Tavatavanawa, who both really initially made their names with Moana. Both left basically at the first opportunity. Almua to join the Crusaders and possibly become an All Black. Tavatavanawa for a Highlanders team who weren't challenging for a Super Rugby title, but he still left. He has become an All Black, so it's been a success story, but neither guy stayed around with Moana. Then they signed Adi Savia, and it seemed like maybe a bit of a turning point for the franchise. You finally had that big name star player who can draw fans in, and that is the exception here, as I said, 2025, where they had their best on-the-field record, where they would have had their best attendances. You had the emergence of Kairon Tamoifolau, who was one of the top Super Rugby try scorers in that year for Moana. You had Fine Anisi, who's not as big a name, but he was, cracking for Moana in that year as well. And then immediately after that massive year, Adi announces he's taken a sabbatical to go to Japan. You could argue looking out for his best interests. You could argue leaving Moana in the lurch. I'll leave that up to you. But obviously it wasn't going to do Moana any favours. But rugby is a very limited time career, so the guy's got to make as much hay while the sun shines on him. Kairon Tamoifolau left for the Chiefs, going from a bottom team, struggling to make the playoffs, to a team who will genuinely be a Super Rugby challenger. Can you blame the youngster? He probably wants to play for the All Blacks as well, because he's Kiwi, even though he's played for Tonga. And then Inisi went to the Dragons, like literally the bottom team in Welsh rugby in the URC. Like the equivalent of Moana over in Wales. But he still took the offer. Again, can you blame him? He's probably on more money. Rugby as a short-term career. So they were limited with the amount of star players they had to start with, and what players they did get basically all left. It's hard. It's hard to build a fan base around a team when the playing roster changes as much as it does every year. You're picking up players who are either unwanted by other clubs or just emerging players. You might get the old one to come through, and then they'll leave. So the financial situation is obviously troublesome. Moana's owner said that they're not going to be able to meet the financial requirements to keep operating next year, hence the decision to close. Not enough major sponsors. Sky's weren't going to be sponsoring them next year anyway. I think World Rugby initially had like a Pacific Players or Pacific Rugby funding allotment, which is not part of Moana this year. So all the funding has dried up. They haven't got the sponsors. They haven't got the funds. So they're closing down operations. So it's been 5 years for Moana. That 2025 year was the year. Everything else, yeah, it's been tough at times. But as I said, we've certainly seen some guys come through from the squad and make their names as top-class rugby players. What does this mean for Super Rugby going forward? Sadly, the practical part of me thinks 10 teams is a better number than 11, because 11 means there's always one team on the bye. And I think the other unions will be kind of happy, because I think that means they get one more home game to host every year, because it'll be a proper home and away set of fixtures. So it might leave the other teams in slightly better financial position. And if Moana, who, to be honest, they've won one game this year, they haven't been that competitive. If some of their players end up signing for other Super Rugby teams, it might make Super Rugby slightly more competitive next year than it is this year. Like Moana are last. Their points difference is minus 207 at the moment. The next worst is 98. So they're the bottom team by quite some distance. We saw it in England. If you guys don't follow English rugby, you probably didn't know, but they had a couple of clubs fold. They had London Irish fold, they had Wasps fold, they had Worcester fold. And the competition since then has kind of compacted a bit. They've got 10 teams now, and it is more kind of balanced. So fingers crossed from a Super Rugby fan perspective, that is what we see happen, despite the bad news, like I said, for everybody associated with Moana. So maybe for the comp, it is a better thing going forward. You guys let me know your thoughts. Were you a kind of Moana's my first team fan? Did you just want to see them do well? Are you disappointed we didn't see more players come through from the Pacific and play for Moana? Like we saw Miracle Whailangi, but he was kind of one of the exceptions. Most of the guys who played for Moana were basically Kiwi-born guys with Pacific heritage, so they didn't really get to fulfill their mission. But yeah, you guys let us know your thoughts. As I said, thoughts go out to everyone associated with the club. You guys take care, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.